Have you ever realized, too late, that you disappeared from your own life? I'm Delia Markham. And one Friday night, while rinsing dishes, I overheard my husband say something to his friends that broke whatever was left of me. That's when I stopped being the woman who stayed quiet and started becoming someone else entirely. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. I still remember that Friday night like it just happened yesterday. It was early fall, cool air slipping through the cracks in the kitchen window, the kind that made the wood floors creak louder than usual. I was standing at the sink under that dim yellow light we never got around to replacing, rinsing off the casserole dish from the lasagna I'd made. Outside, Ray and his friends were on the back porch, beers in hand, laughing like boys at summer camp. It was the kind of night that used to make me feel proud. A warm meal, a clean house, laughter in the air. A woman could take comfort in that. Or at least, she used to. The laughter came in waves, loud, loose, familiar. I heard the clink of bottles, the crumple of chip bags. I wasn't really listening until I heard my name. Not in the way a partner might say it gently across a room, but like an afterthought tossed into a sentence too fast to grab back. She's a good woman, I'll give her that. Ray's voice was closer than I expected. He must have leaned near the sliding door. But man, Delia's really let herself go. You should have seen her back in the day, tight little waist, always done up nice. Now it's all house dresses and garlic breath. Hell, I can't even get her out of the kitchen anymore. Someone snorted. Another muttered something I couldn't quite catch. And then, Ray laughed. Not a nervous chuckle. A full-on, shoulders-shaking laugh. Like it was a joke he'd been holding in for years. I didn't drop the dish. I didn't slam the faucet. I just stood there, hands soaking wet, dish rag hanging limp from my fingers. I think I stopped breathing for a second. Not because I didn't believe he said it, but because deep down, I knew he meant it. And I didn't know when exactly it had happened, when I became the punchline. It wasn't that I was shocked he thought I looked older. I mean, I did. I do. I've got lines around my eyes now, and my hips creak a little when I bend to unload the dishwasher. My hair's more gray than not, and I haven't worn lipstick since our daughter's wedding 7 years ago. But I always figured love accounted for time. I always figured we were getting older together. I wiped my hands on the towel. Slowly. Methodically. Like my body needed time to catch up with what my heart had just heard. The room felt different, smaller, like the walls were nudging in. My eyes drifted to the kitchen table. The same one we'd sat at for 29 Thanksgivings. The one I refinished by hand the year he forgot our anniversary and I didn't say a word. I don't know what I expected, maybe that he'd follow that awful comment with some kind of backtrack. A laugh that said, just kidding. A change in tone. But no. He moved on. Changed the subject. Started talking about some football game like the moment hadn't just gutted the air out of my chest. I'd been invisible before. Plenty of times. But I'd never felt erased. I stood there for a few more minutes, long after the water went cold. Then I turned off the faucet, clicked the light off, and walked down the hallway in silence. The house creaked under my steps, like it wasn't sure whether to stop me or let me go. When I got to the bedroom, I didn't change. I didn't brush my teeth or check the door locks like I always do. I just lay down on top of the covers, still in my apron, and stared at the ceiling. That ceiling had seen a lot. Arguments, reconciliations, long silences. Laughter, too. Babies being rocked. Rain tapping against the glass. But that night, it saw something else, a woman taking inventory. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just lay there quietly, thinking. Thinking about every time I'd swallowed my pride to keep peace. Every time I'd skipped my own needs because his seemed more important. Every compliment I never got. Every time someone asked what I wanted, and I answered, whatever you like. And somewhere between midnight and morning, I started mentally packing. Not suitcases, not boxes, but all the little pieces of myself I'd scattered over the years. The parts I'd left behind to make room for someone else's comfort. That was the night everything shifted. I didn't know it yet, but I had already started leaving. There's a kind of silence that sneaks in slowly. Not the peaceful kind, like when you're reading a book on a rainy afternoon. No, this one's different. It shows up between words that used to matter. It settles between the clinks of silverware, the half-hearted mess at the end of your sentences. Before you know it, you start measuring your worth by how full the laundry basket is or how quickly you can get dinner on the table without being asked. That's where I was, for years. I kept thinking it was normal. After all, we'd been married for over 3 decades. Who still flirts after that long? Who still says, "You look beautiful," when you've been folding their underwear since Reagan was in office? Ray used to pull my chair out for me. He used to kiss the back of my hand just because. But those gestures faded like the pattern on our sofa, slowly, so I couldn't say when exactly they disappeared. They were just gone. Replaced by routine. Efficiency. The sort of quiet detachment that feels polite from the outside but cold as hell when you're the one it's aimed at. He started calling me hon less and hey more. Then, at some point, even that stopped. He didn't say my name unless he was calling for dinner. What's for dinner? Is dinner ready? Dinner's getting cold. Like dinner had replaced Delia. I kept showing up, though. I grocery shopped like a pro, stacked coupons, knew which days the chicken thighs were on sale. I folded his flannel shirts with the buttons lined just right. I made his favorite peach cobbler on Sundays. All the little things you do when you believe love is action. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling seen. There's a dangerous kind of devotion that looks a lot like fear. I thought I was being loyal. Now I realize I was just scared of what would happen if I stopped. If I said, "You know what? I don't feel like cooking tonight." Or worse, if I asked, "Do you even see me anymore?" Ray wasn't cruel. That's what made it hard to pinpoint. He wasn't yelling or cheating or storming out at midnight. He was just indifferent. And I kept mistaking that for stability. I remember one afternoon, not too long before that Friday night, I wandered into a cafe I hadn't been to in years. It was called Linden and Fogg, tucked between a yarn store and a dry cleaner. I went in because I liked the smell, strong coffee, warm cinnamon, a little vanilla. It felt like breathing again after holding your breath for too long. And that's where I saw Maris. We'd gone to high school together, though she'd always been the quiet type. She looked almost the same, soft gray hair pulled into a messy bun, a nose ring I didn't remember from before, and a kind of settled look in her eyes. Like someone who had stopped trying to win approval and started building a life that didn't need it. She smiled when she saw me. "Delia? Oh my God, it's been, 35 years?" I nodded. "At least." She poured me a cup of black coffee before I even asked. Then she slid a warm slice of apple pie in front of me and said, "On the house. You look like you need something sweet." I laughed, but it came out too tight. "Do I look that bad?" Maris tilted her head. "No. You look tired. Not sleepy tired. The other kind. The kind where you've been carrying something too long, and no one's offered to take a bit of it off your shoulders." I opened my mouth to say something, maybe argue, but nothing came out. I just stared at the pie. That's when she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. It wasn't dramatic. Just a small gesture, warm, steady, no pity in it. And suddenly, I felt real again. Like maybe I hadn't disappeared completely, after all. I don't know how long I sat there. She didn't rush me. Didn't ask questions. Just kept the coffee warm and let me be. After that, I started stopping by once a week. Sometimes twice. I didn't always eat or talk. Sometimes I just sat in the corner with a book I never opened. Maris never minded. She said the back room had a good chair if I ever needed to sit somewhere nobody needed anything from me. She called it just breathing space. That's what it felt like, breathing. Not performing. Not planning dinner or folding socks or remembering to pick up his prescriptions. Just sitting. Existing. Letting the clock tick without feeling guilty. Funny how something as simple as being offered pie by an old friend can start to loosen the knots you didn't even know you had. I wasn't ready to leave yet. But I was beginning to imagine what it might feel like to matter, even if no one was asking you to serve them first. I remember that evening clear as day. I'd been on my feet most of the afternoon, made chicken marsala from scratch, cleaned out the fridge, even repotted the dying spider plant near the window. I was proud of myself. I felt useful, I guess. And maybe, just maybe, I thought Ray might notice. So I asked, gently, trying not to sound too eager, "What do you think about going out for dinner one of these nights? Just the two of us?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "Why?" he said. "So people can see you in that old coat and wonder what happened to the woman I used to bring around?" It took me a second to register the words. Not because I didn't understand them, but because they were sharp in a way Ray rarely was. Usually, he dealt in indifference. Dullness. Not daggers. I didn't answer. I just blinked slowly, like my body was buffering the pain before letting it hit all the way. Then I nodded, like I agreed with him. Like I was grateful for the clarity. Inside, though, I felt a thread snap. Quiet, but final. I went to the laundry room. Not because anything needed washing, but because I needed a place to hide my face. I opened the dryer, pulled out a stack of towels, and that's when I saw the manila envelope, half tucked under the detergent box. I should have left it alone. But something told me this was one of those moments when the universe wants you to look, just once, so you can stop pretending. Inside were old photos. I recognized most of them, me in my 20s, holding our first baby, smiling at a summer picnic, hair curled, lips painted. I looked like someone who still believed she'd be loved forever. But behind my pictures, there were more. A woman I didn't recognize. Younger. Maybe early 30s. She wore crisp blazers and bright lipstick, posed in a way that said she was used to being admired. Some were group shots at what looked like a company event, Ray in the background, this woman always somewhere near. There was nothing scandalous. No love notes. No hotel receipts. But the way he'd kept those photos, tucked in the same envelope with mine, spoke volumes. It wasn't betrayal in the traditional sense. It was worse. It was the realization that the woman he once admired was no longer me. That he'd replaced her, in his mind at least, with someone newer, shinier. A silent swap. No explanation needed. I wasn't jealous of her. I was ashamed of myself. Ashamed that I'd spent so long trying to get back to the woman in the old pictures, thinking that was what Ray wanted. But the truth hit me like cold water, he didn't want that woman back. He just wanted someone he didn't have to see too clearly. And I had been fading on purpose. Dressing quieter, speaking less, taking up less space in the hopes that he'd stop noticing how much I'd changed. But that night, in the dim light of the laundry room, I realized something even more painful. I wasn't jealous of the woman in those photos. I was jealous of who I used to be when I still believed he saw me. I didn't confront him. Not because I was scared, no, that kind of fear had left me. I stayed quiet because I didn't feel like explaining pain to someone who didn't care he'd caused it. Instead, I started preparing in silence. I cleared out the junk drawer. I sorted through old bills, set aside things that had my name only. I began packing, not visibly, not in boxes, but inside my mind. What would I take? What could I leave? What would hurt to see again? Maris must have seen something shift in me, even if I didn't say a word. One afternoon, as I lingered in her cafe a little longer than usual, she handed me a key. No fanfare. No speech. Just placed it in my hand and closed my fingers around it. In case you ever need somewhere quiet, she said. Somewhere that doesn't ask questions. I nodded. My throat tightened. Not because I needed the key right then, but because for the first time in years, someone saw the storm building inside me and didn't look away. I went home that night and made Ray's dinner like always. I folded his napkin just the way he liked. I even turned on his favorite TV show before he walked in the door. But something was different now. That night at dinner, I made baked salmon with lemon and dill, steamed broccoli, and a little wild rice on the side. I plated it just right, wiped the edge of the dishes with a towel the way I used to when the kids were small and everything still felt hopeful. I even lit the candle in the center of the table, the one Ray usually rolled his eyes at like it was some kind of unnecessary production. He sat down without a word. Took one bite, chewed, then picked at the fish with his fork. It's a bit oily, he muttered. Not like how you used to make it when you still cared about calories. I didn't say anything at first. I looked down at my plate, then at his face, lined, tired, distracted by some thought more important than the moment he was in. Then I asked him, calmly, without raising my voice. Do you see me as a burden now? He blinked. Like the question surprised him. Like it had come from a stranger. What? No, he said. Don't start. You're being sensitive again. And just like that, those 5 words, it was like someone drove a pin straight into the softest part of me. You're being sensitive again. It wasn't the first time he said it. Over the years, it had become his go-to phrase whenever I tried to express something that didn't fit his version of comfort. If I cried? You're overreacting. If I felt left out? You take things too personally. If I needed something? You're never satisfied. He didn't yell. He never had to. He just shrunk my feelings until they no longer fit the room. That night, I didn't finish my food. I cleaned up the dishes, wiped the counters, and then walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch with a notepad in my lap. The TV was off. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak in the floorboards as Ray moved around upstairs. I wrote a list. Not a letter. Not a goodbye. Just a list of everything I'd given up without even realizing it. Working at the clinic on weekends. Sunday breakfasts with Angie after church. The watercolor class I signed up for 3 years ago and never attended. My favorite red coat that Ray once said looked a bit much. The way I used to sleep in on Saturdays. My name, which had been replaced with "Hey and dinner's ready." The softness in my voice that used to sing to our children. The way I used to laugh too loud and not care. I wrote slowly, deliberately. Like I was unearthing fossils of a life I'd buried to keep the peace. When I finished, I folded the paper twice and slipped it into the side pocket of my purse. I wasn't going to leave it behind. I wasn't going to share it with him. It wasn't for Ray. It was for me. A reminder. Proof that I hadn't imagined what I gave up. That I didn't just drift here. I walked. I handed over pieces of myself one by one, hoping it would keep things from falling apart. And they still did. I stayed in the living room that night. Ray came down once to ask if I was coming to bed. I told him I was too tired to move. He didn't press. He never pressed. That was part of the problem. The next morning, I got up before sunrise. I made a pot of coffee, put on a soft sweater, and stepped outside with my phone in hand. It was still chilly, that crisp morning air that settles over Oregon like a blanket you forgot you needed. I walked a few blocks to the corner pharmacy under the guise of picking up vitamins. But what I really did was sit on the bench outside, watching the street start to wake up, delivery trucks, joggers, a woman walking her golden retriever in fuzzy slippers. Then I opened my phone, scrolled to Maris's name, and typed just 5 words. "Is the room still open?" The reply came back faster than I expected. Just 2 words. Always is. I stared at the screen for a long time, letting the weight of that message settle into my bones. Someone was saving space for me. Not because they needed anything in return. Not because I'd earned it. But just because I mattered enough to have it. I left on a Monday morning, right after sunrise. The sky was that pale, washed-out blue that only happens when the world's still waking up. Ray was in bed, snoring lightly, the same sound I'd fallen asleep to for more than 30 years. I didn't wait for him to stir. I didn't write a letter. I didn't even pack a suitcase. Just one small note, folded neatly and placed next to the coffee pot on the kitchen counter. "I'm gone for a few days. Don't wait for dinner." No name. No explanation. Just that. I walked out with a canvas tote slung over my shoulder, a few clothes, my wallet, and the key Maris had given me weeks earlier. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of doing something so out of character it felt like I was borrowing someone else's body. I'd never stayed at a hotel alone. Never gone anywhere without calling first, checking in, giving a full itinerary. Even when our kids were small and I wanted a weekend to myself, I always asked permission. Like I needed a hall pass for my own time. But that morning, I didn't ask. I just walked. My car felt foreign. I drove in silence, both windows down, letting the wind whip my hair into a mess I didn't care to fix. I didn't take the freeway. I took back roads through neighborhoods with cracked sidewalks and overgrown yards, past gas stations and car washes and corner diners that hadn't changed since the 90s. Maris wasn't at the cafe when I arrived. She'd left a sticky note on the back door, "Room's yours. Towels on the shelf. Lock up if you leave." I stepped into the little room behind the kitchen, a converted storeroom with a twin bed, a chipped desk, and a window that faced a brick wall. It was small. Plain. Quiet. And it felt like safety. I dropped my bag on the floor, kicked off my shoes, and lay down fully dressed. I don't even remember pulling the blanket over me. I just remember the way the air smelled, coffee grounds and cinnamon, and how my body didn't feel like it was bracing for something. I slept for 13 hours. No dreams. No tossing. Just out. When I woke up, Maris was in the front cafe, refilling salt shakers and humming along to an old Bonnie Raitt song. She didn't act surprised to see me. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for a mug. I nodded, still half in a fog. We didn't talk about why I'd come. She didn't pry. She just poured the coffee, added a splash of cream the way she knew I liked it, and slid a plate with half a blueberry muffin in front of me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Later that afternoon, as the cafe emptied out and the sun began sliding toward the trees, we sat on crates in the back storage area, folding dish towels and sharing slices of cold watermelon. She told me about her ex-husband. How he used to say, "You're lucky I still look at you. Most men don't go for women over 50. I winced. Maris didn't. She just shrugged. For a while, I believed him. Then one day I asked myself, if that's true, what the hell am I still living for? I didn't have an answer. but I knew the feeling. We talked about things we used to love and had quietly let go of. She used to paint birds. I used to sing while cooking. We laughed about the way men never seem to notice the 100 things you do to keep them comfortable, but always point out the one thing you didn't do. At one point she looked at me and said, "You don't need fixing, Delia. You need witnessing." That sentence sat in my chest like warm soup on a cold day. Over the next few days, I stayed in that little back room. I swept the floor of the cafe when no one asked me to. I helped Maris restock shelves, wiped down tables, sorted sugar packets by color just because it made me feel calm. I wasn't anyone's wife. I wasn't someone's mother. I was just a woman in a soft cardigan with hands that still worked and a heart that was beginning to unfreeze. There were no dinner bells. No raised voices. No side glances about what I was wearing or whether I'd put on weight. Just quiet. Just breathing. One night, while we drank tea in chipped mugs by the back door, Maris said softly, "It's not a palace, but nobody here's gonna make you feel invisible." I nodded, throat tight. Because that was it, really. I hadn't needed applause. I hadn't even needed love. I just needed to feel real again. And in that tiny room behind a cafe, folding towels with a woman who once lost herself too, I started to remember what that felt like. The call came on a Wednesday morning. I was slicing strawberries in the back kitchen of the cafe, the radio humming low with some old jazz tune, when my phone lit up with Ray's name. I stared at it for a second, not because I didn't expect it, honestly, I'd been expecting it since the moment I walked out, but because I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear his voice again. Still, I picked up. There was no "how are you?" No "are you safe?" He didn't even pause to breathe. "Are you coming back soon?" he asked. "There's a ton of stuff piling up here. The trash is full, and there's no clean forks left." I held the phone to my ear in silence. Just stood there, thumb pressed into the edge of the cutting board, heart slowing to something still and cold. I didn't answer him. I just hung up. And right then, right there in the middle of that cafe kitchen, with strawberry juice staining my fingers, I realized something clear and solid. I hadn't left my home. I'd returned to myself. All those years, I'd mistaken staying for loving. Serving for loyalty. But that wasn't a home I'd been living in. It was a place where my usefulness had become my only identity. And I was tired of being useful to someone who didn't think I mattered unless I was cooking or folding or keeping quiet. Later that day, Ray showed up at the cafe. It was slow that afternoon. A few regulars sipping iced tea, 2 women playing cards in the corner. I saw his truck through the front window before I saw him walk in. He looked like he hadn't shaved in a few days. Still wearing that gray windbreaker he always swore was too warm for spring. He walked up to the counter like it was a negotiation table. "Can we talk?" he asked, barely glancing at Maris behind the register. I nodded and led him to a booth in the back, my heart pounding but my face calm. I'd practiced this moment in my mind 100 times. He leaned in and started right off, voice hushed but edged. "Look, I know I said some things I shouldn't have. But come on, Delia, it wasn't like I hit you or ran around with other women. You're acting like I committed a crime." I tilted my head slightly. "You didn't hit me. You didn't cheat. You just wore me down, one word at a time." He scoffed. "It was a few stupid comments." "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "It was years of acting like I was furniture. Something that's just supposed to be there, not noticed, not appreciated, just functioning." He shifted in his seat, jaw tight. "I didn't mean for it to come across that way." "Maybe not. But it did. And I believed you, Ray. I believed you every time you said I was overreacting or too sensitive. I thought if I worked harder, loved harder, stayed quieter, you'd see me again." He looked at the table, fingers tapping. And now I see me, I said. And I don't want to go back to being invisible. At that moment, the cafe got quiet. Even the card game in the corner seemed to pause. I could feel people looking, not in a nosy way, but in that soft, human way when you witness someone say a truth that's too big to stay inside any longer. Ray opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "So what now? You gonna take the house? The accounts?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictably small. "I don't want your house," I said. "I don't want your money. I'll file the paperwork to separate our accounts. You keep your things, and I'll keep mine." He blinked. "You're really doing this?" I nodded. "I'm not doing it to punish you. I'm doing it because I finally realized I don't have to live my life proving my worth to someone who never really saw it." Right then, Maris appeared from the kitchen. She didn't say a word. Just walked over and placed a hand gently on my shoulder. A simple touch, but it steadied me like an anchor. Ray looked at her, then back at me. I think he expected me to cry. To break. To beg for understanding. But I just looked at him with a kind of tired peace. We were done. The days after Ray left the cafe passed in that strange, weightless way time does when something final has happened. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. Mostly, I felt quiet. Like a window had finally been cracked open after being sealed shut for years, and the air was just starting to move again. He started texting a few days later. Not angry texts, not begging either, just awkward, short ones. "Hope you're okay. House is quiet." Then, "I miss you." And finally, "I'll do better. I want you to feel like yourself again." But here's the thing, by the time he started promising to let me be myself, I had already remembered how. I didn't respond. I didn't block him either. I just let the messages pile up like leaves I didn't feel like raking. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I had nothing left to explain. He had spent years looking at me without seeing me. I had spent years talking without ever being heard. What else was there to say? A week passed. Maybe 8 days, I wasn't counting. I went to the grocery store on a Thursday morning, just to pick up some tea and paper towels. The air was still cool from the night before, and I remember thinking how nice it felt to walk without rushing, without wondering what someone might be waiting on me to finish. That's when I saw him, Ray, standing in the frozen foods aisle at Greenvale Pharmacy. He looked smaller somehow. Not in size, but in presence. His shoulders were slouched, his hair grayer than I remembered, and he had 3 microwave dinners in his hands. He saw me and blinked like I'd caught him doing something shameful. "Delia," he said, like he wasn't sure if he had the right to say my name anymore. "Hey." I nodded. "Hi." He cleared his throat. "You're not coming home?" I looked at him, really looked. The sag of his eyes. The pale bags under them. The slump of someone who didn't realize how much he depended on someone until they were no longer there to clean up after him. "No," I said simply. He shifted from foot to foot. It doesn't feel like home without you." I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence sit between us, heavy and full of all the years he hadn't listened. Then I said, softly, "That's because I made it feel like home. Without me, it's just a building." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. He looked down at the boxes in his hands, meatloaf, chicken pot pie, and macaroni and cheese. It almost made me sad. Almost. "I miss you," he said finally. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't feel pulled in or guilty or uncertain. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You miss the woman who served you. That woman doesn't exist anymore. The woman standing here now, She's someone you never really got to know." He didn't respond. And I didn't wait. I turned and walked to the checkout, bought my tea and paper towels, and walked out into the morning sunlight. I didn't look back. Back at the little room behind the cafe, I made myself a cup of peppermint tea and opened the window just a crack. The spring breeze carried the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. I sat on the bed, barefoot, warm mug in hand, and stared at the sunlight spilling onto the floorboards. Then I grabbed a sticky note from the nightstand drawer, wrote down a sentence I hadn't planned, and stuck it on the wall above the bed. "I don't need anyone to make me whole. I just need a life that doesn't require permission to be mine." It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't meant to prove anything to Ray or anyone else. It was a promise. To myself. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on the back porch of the cafe with a mug of tea and the sky just starting to turn gold, I think about the early days, right after Ray and I got married. Back when we thought love was enough to carry anything. I believed if I cooked the right meals, remembered birthdays, folded the towels the way he liked, he'd always see me as special. I thought love was built on effort. That if I poured enough of myself into our life together, we'd stay full. But I was wrong. Love doesn't grow stronger from sacrifice. It grows from being known and being respected. All I'd done was teach someone how to expect everything from me without offering anything back. So I started over. Not with fanfare or drama. Just quiet changes. I scrubbed the small room behind Maris's cafe from corner to corner, not because it was dirty, but because I needed the ritual. I needed to claim the space. It had been my shelter, but now it would be my home. No more borrowed time. No more just until I go back. I rearranged the drawers. Bought a small potted fern for the window. Hung up 2 thrift store paintings, a rowboat in a foggy lake and a sunflower too big for its frame. They didn't match, but they made the room feel like it belonged to someone real. Someone like me. A month passed. Then, one Tuesday morning, I opened the mailbox out back and found a letter from Ray. Handwritten, no return address. It was short. 5 lines, maybe 6. "No, dear Delia. No, I'm sorry. Just, I don't know what to cook anymore. I eat cereal for dinner and the house smells like nothing. Not even dust. Just cold." I read it once. Then again. And then I slid it into the bottom drawer beneath my socks and forgot about it. That letter was like so many things he used to say, barely there, hoping I'd fill in the emotional labor. Hoping I'd hear pain and come running. But I'd done that too many times already. There was a time I would have felt guilty. Would have read it as a cry for help. But now? I just saw it for what it was, late, and still not really about me. Instead of replying, I picked up the community center flyer I'd been carrying around for weeks and signed up for a watercolor class. Every Thursday at 6 p.m. A group of women, most in their 60s and 70s, sitting in a circle with brushes in hand and quiet purpose on their faces. I didn't paint well, not at first. My trees looked like green clouds and my lakes were too blue. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the way I felt when I lost track of time. When I dipped the brush into the water and watched pigment swirl like something coming alive. One misty afternoon, I painted a wooden chair, a plain one, like the one from my old kitchen. I added a soft tangle of cloth over the back, like the old apron I used to wear. When it dried, I signed it in the corner. Still here. That was enough for me. Proof that something in me had stayed strong, even while the rest of me had bent for so long. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Maris and I sat on the porch behind the cafe. She poured tea into mismatched mugs, and we watched the light spill across the pavement like melted butter. She looked over and asked, "Do you think Ray will ever really understand what he lost?" I thought about it for a second. Then I shook my head. Maybe. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. She raised an eyebrow. I smiled. It's enough that I understand now. That's all I ever needed. We sat in silence for a while, not the awkward kind, but the soft, full kind that only happens when nothing needs fixing. And then I said the thing I'd been circling for months, the one truth that had waited patiently beneath all the noise. I used to live like love had to be earned. Like I had to be better, quieter, more useful just to deserve it. But now, I live like being myself is enough. And I meant every word. You know, these days, now that I'm well into my 70s, I spend more mornings than not on that little porch, sipping tea and letting the sunlight wander across my sketchbook. Looking back, I'm almost grateful I overheard those careless words. They startled me awake just in time to enjoy the years I have left. The house I live in now is small, the meals simple, but every corner feels chosen, not assigned. Maybe you've carried a weight like that, quiet, polite, heavy as stone. If so, I hope my story reminds you the door is still open, no matter how long you've stood on the wrong side of it. And if this journey spoke to something in you, I'd be honored to have you join me for the next tale I share, whenever you're ready, in your own good time.